Studio continues live right here, and we're now being joined by Professor Oyebode, Akin Oyebode. Good morning, and thanks for joining us. Earlier on, I had a cheeky one with Kayode Akintami telling him that he's seen more elections than me in the country, and I know that now we have even upped the ante by saying you have seen more elections than Kayode right here in the country. Looking at elections in the country from the First Republic to this very moment as we speak, how would you assess our movement, our progression? Are we getting better, or we're just there?
Well, thank you very much for your intro. I want to say that things are getting better. We now live in a globalized world where we know and learn from experiences of other countries. Elections happen everywhere, and we have full coverage thanks to the global networks. So Nigeria is a member of the international community, and our people are more enlightened. We have a sprawling middle class. People have access to social media. The newspapers might be fewer than a few years ago, and a little bit more expensive. There was a time I used to read about 10 newspapers every day. Now I'm down to 3 or 4. But by and large, I'll say that we've moved on, up. Although we still have a steep learning curve in terms of electioneering. As you well know, elections are a festival of democracy, but they presuppose certain inevitable situations, things, popular awareness, consciousness, and the ability to discern. Democracy is about the right to choose, and if you want to choose, you must be informed. Informed choice based on certain criteria, what I think Ronald Reagan was expressing way back in 1980. You look back at 4 years ago, how has your life been? If your life had improved since then of course you keep the momentum, more of the same. But like Ronald Reagan said, if your life has not improved, then you want a turnaround. And that is why Jimmy Carter had to be voted out and Ronald Reagan came in. So if you put that scenario into Nigeria, what Nigerians should do is to ask themselves, how have things been compared with how they were 4 years ago? Well, and then make a choice on that basis.
Professor, this week has been very busy in terms of, activities of political parties on the part of INEC as well, who has been making last-minute deployments. We've also seen the president address the nation just this morning. They call it a pre-election speech to let the people, well, perhaps understand where it is that we are. 16 years of unbroken democracy and maybe the significance of tomorrow. Did you listen to that speech, and what were you able to take out of it?
I didn't. I just heard snippets of it. But quite frankly, I believe it's a gratuitous speech because the president is a player, and the same opportunity was not afforded his opponents. So he's taking unfair advantage over those who are competing to get his job. He might be playing the role of statesman, but I think it's not necessary. I think it's gregariously excessive because he has gone around the country. He has used every opportunity to canvass. And this 5 minutes to midnight type speech, for me, is really unwarranted.
Some people would say...
Let me take from where Sulai just dropped there. What immediate impressions do you get for the Nigeria 2015 elections, having seen other elections in the past, as to what other sub-regional countries are doing in preparations for what is coming?
I don't understand you. The elections I've seen as a young kid growing up here in this country, say the 1959 elections. I still remember very well. We had radio then, a radio broadcaster popularized Bakodaya, somebody who's called Neil in the northern part of the country. And people like Chief Awolowo, his posters were clear. A man with a plan, freedom for all, life more abundant, and the Awo signal of victory and all that. As a young kid, I was enthused by the type of political activities. And somebody like Zik, who will come to a place like Ekiti and tell them that he just came to exchange pleasantries, blah, blah, blah. It was very friendly. There was hostility in certain parts of the country where Chief Awolowo was not welcome. He had to go by helicopter. Nigerians had never seen anything like that. It was Chief Awolowo that brought helicopter into campaigning.
So
okay?
My question now, again, let me just refreshen it because you didn't understand from the beginning.
I didn't.
Is that what Nigeria is doing now, what you saw back then in the days, what was Ghana, for example, what was Togo doing, for example, in preparations that Nigeria will be going through transition?
Well, I'm not very sure that we even had an insight into the political process in Ghana. I remember the 6th of March 1957 when Kwame Nkrumah was addressing the nation on the occasion of the independence of Ghana. We listened to it by radio, okay? That's about all we knew. And then the CPP was so powerful in Ghana, the question of opposition did not arise. The Convention of People's Party, Ghana, and you know, Pan-Africanism and all that. It was a far cry from what was happening in Nigeria, where you see Ghana, Nkrumah, because they had Nkrumah, he succeeded in focusing attention on the birth of a new nation, changing the name of the country from Gold Coast to Ghana at the point of independence. The focus, Ghanaians were lucky to have a leader with tremendous foresight, political foresight. In the country, Nigeria, in our own country, things were still unsettled. We were still Nigeria. Nobody accepted the definition of Kalu Ezera.
And has that changed?
Well, I think there is higher consciousness, as I said earlier on. We have very many more graduates than we ever had. Last count, we have over 130 universities at various stages of unpreparedness, no doubt. But still, like another noteworthy politician of that time, Akin Oyebode used to say, big engine, big exhaust. So the fact that Nigeria has this capacity, unlike any other African country, it invites a lot of expectations from us as a people.
Well, Professor, much later in the program, we're going to be, talking about voter participation and what we'll be expecting. Now that you're talking about how, how much bigger our middle class is, how much universities we have, how many younger people we have in our population, and what we should be hoping to see considering the collection of permanent voter cards. The one thing was to register, another thing was to collect your voter cards for this one, and what the results most likely will be. Maybe we'll be seeing the highest participation of any group of electorate in any elections in Nigeria. That will be a subject for discussion, but you definitely have sparked controversy. You've talked about how that was unfair, the president's statement, but a lot of people will say that happens when the president is also a candidate. He wears two caps. At what point do we begin to say then that, he's wearing one cap, and at what point do we say, well, he shouldn't have worn that cap at this particular point? Because whether or not you like it, some people will say that was the president of Nigeria, as of today, addressing his people and stating very categorically what the importance of tomorrow will spell for this country.
No doubt about it. President Jonathan is president. He reminded also us that he was commander-in-chief.
Yes.
So he's throwing everything at it to justify his address. But I would never have imagined Barack Obama addressing all Americans on the eve of the presidential elections. I mean, such an input for me bespeaks underdevelopment, political underdevelopment, and infantile disposition about democracy. The elections are to commence in a few hours. You leave things as they are. I think such an address will have been more palatable to me if after the election is won and lost, in his acceptance speech or consolation or whatever. But before the elections, I think it's most unnecessary. I don't want to be too severe. He cast himself in the mold of a statesman. Good. But I'm saying it's unfair on the rest.
It's not the first time. It's not the first time that this has happened. I mean, it's like a tradition to address your people just before elections? Would you have rather that he did this yesterday?
I don't know the tradition that you are talking about. What the tradition I know of is the president addressing Nigerians on national independence, important occasions, when the dawn speech, as we call it. But because he's a participant, you know, he's a player, he's not a honest broker. You know, he has vested interest. Otherwise, why has he been going in the hustings? And some people have raised queries about his flying in federal government jets, which again is unconscionable. You need a level playing field for all the contestants. But when you use the power of incumbency to derive advantage to yourself, some people will cry foul.
But some people...
We'll come back, sorry, Marco, we'll come back to Prof. And we'll try to, we haven't actually done enough from the way you started, which I quite liked, and as you were reeling out all of those things, I said, oh my God. So even my little experience of the victory sign and the one finger sign for the 1979 elections, even as a child, I think you just reminded me of how they were playing their politics at that point in time. We'll still go back to that and look at so many other issues, but we understand that the awful situation which we experienced yesterday in Owo, that banks were raided. The Commissioner of Police in Ondo State is live on the phone now, so I'd like to go back to him.